Is 9:02, and we will begin. I'm going to first project for you an image, and this is a lot of sort of stock photo. Hang on a second. I just got to let in. Okay. Stock photo stuff. This is the Theater of Athens, Theater of Dionysus in Athens. Let me just open that up. Okay. So if you visit Athens today, you will see this, which is excavated on the south side of the Acropolis. So right above you, as you see the hills sloping up, you see very steep walls, and then there are battlements above that, and then you have the Parthenon and the famous buildings of the Acropolis above that. So below there is the Theater of Dionysus. This is the sort of the mother theater of Greek tragedy, right? This is where basically all of the great Greek tragedies were written, because tragedy is, by and large, an Athenian phenomenon, and it is woven into the life of the city. Looking at the theater today, you can see the sort of the size of it by looking at the people sort of walking up and down. The stone seating is consists of rebuilding over the centuries. So the original theater was pretty much a flat area and the hillside, right? And then during the time of Pisistratus, 534 BCE, when the festival of Dionysus was sort of reorganized or formalized in connection with the famous actor, so-called first actor, whose name is Thespis, hence Thespian, right? Who was supposed to have used a cart to present his songs from. That's 534, right? Probably you would have no stone seating at all at that point. People would just sit on the hillside, and the natural acoustics of the hillside would allow people higher up to hear what was going on. And you could see the roadway in front to the right. There's a kind of a roadway which in which the chorus would come dancing in and then dance out. So the chorus comes in through one entrance, the parados, and they will dance and sing in the middle in the orchestra, and then they will leave by the other road. When you think of tragedy, you think of a festival in honor of Dionysus, right? The word tragos means goat. So a lot of people think that tragedies were contests in which a goat was given as a prize, in the olden days. In later times, there were more formal prizes of olive oil, prizes of civic crowns, but mostly glory. In the sort of the more structured time. But the core of the festival is really a religious rite, and it happens at a set time of the year. The Athenians had two great festivals of Dionysus. One was this one that we're talking about, the city Dionysia, which lasted 3 days. And on each day, one playwright was entitled to take the whole day. He would present 3 tragedies and 1 satyr play. The satyr play kind of harkens back to the old days of Thespis, the origins of tragedy. The chorus is dressed as satyrs. It's kind of lascivious. It's lewd, like a lot of body jokes. It's very light. Sometimes it spoofs on more serious themes, but it's kind of a tension breaker. And the 3 tragedies that were presented before basically could either be on one given theme, one part of the mythical cycle, or they could be totally detached from each other. And that was entirely the choice of the playwright. So for 3 days, the audience would assemble. 17,000 is said to be the capacity of the theater in the 4th century. Even if it was something like 10,000 in the 5th century, right, during the age of Pericles, it's probably a good proportion, maybe a quarter of the entire male citizen body. And if the poor people sat up on the hillsides, kind of further away in the cheap seats, you could probably pretty much get the entire male citizen body there. Did women go? We have some evidence that women attended. It's scattered. It's mostly because I have to click out of this to let people in. Hang on a second. Let me stop presenting for a second to let people in. Hang on. Okay, here we go. Women being present. The famous tragedian Aeschylus, who comes before Sophocles, presented this chorus of Eumenides' Furies, these sort of avenging deities. And they were so horrible in their costume that it is said that women who were close to childbirth went into labor. And that's really the main evidence that we have that women were at these tragedies. So other than that, we kind of feel it's a very male ritual, which is interesting because a lot of the themes are extremely are concerned with the life of women and concerned with interesting sort of gender issues. But it's mostly a male audience, and the actors are all male too. Even the female parts are played by males. So when you look at that theater, you see both the venue for a performance, for sort of entertainment. It costs a little bit of money. I'm just going to put that picture of the theater back up. It costs a little bit of money to get in, and if you were poor, there was something called the Theoric Fund, where you could have the state pay for your admissions ticket, 2 obols to get in. It's about a third of a day's wage for an ordinary semi-skilled worker. So the state would pay, and you go in, and it's crowded, and no bathroom and no food, is probably hot. And you'd watch the 3 tragedies in the theater play starting from sunrise. So there are tragedies in which the sunrise itself is built into the plot. So as the first actor starts reciting his lines, he says something about a light or behold. Famously in Aeschylus' Agamemnon, supposedly they refer to a light that signals the fall of Troy, and it's right when the sun is rising. And you'd be there all day, right? 3 tragedies and a satyr play with a little bit of intermission. It would take you pretty much the whole day, right, till or late afternoon, early evening. And then after you'd seen the 3 festivals, you would vote, and there'd be first, second, and third prize. This physical space, though, is not only the space where the city would convene, a large proportion of the city, if not really the entire political body, for entertainment purposes. But this is where the ecclesia would meet. This is where they would meet in their direct democracy town hall kind of format. Very important trials, public interest would be held in this space, right? So when we read in Thucydides, right, about the debate around Mytilene and the fate of the Mytileneans, you have to imagine the speakers, Cleon and Diodotus, speaking to the audience in this venue, right? If you ever visit Greece, if you go to one of the theaters, especially the theater at Epidaurus, on in the Peloponnese, is really well preserved. You could stand in the center of the orchestra, and you could just speak in a normal voice, and people way in the top row can hear you. The acoustics are just so good. We can't make the same claim for what was going on in the theater of Athens, but we assume the acoustics were pretty good, and the orators, were probably speaking at a considerably louder volume. But it was the the space where enormous decisions of public importance were made, right? So you imagine Diodotus, about whom we know nothing, right? He only occurs as the speaker in the Middle-Enean debate, right? You can imagine Diodotus telling the Athenians, you can't just punish those who revolt against your empire by slaughtering them, because you have to think about three things. You have to think about, first, utilitarian issues. If you do this to them, then anyone else in the empire will know that they might as well run the risk of anything, because you have essentially the Athenians have essentially no sort of control over limitations of punishment. You go right to the sort of capital punishment. And so you're going to cause people to sort of risk everything to incite revolt if they have small issues with you. He also talks about the just the external perception, right? What will the outside world think of Athens, right? In terms of, like, will Athens be on the right side of history, right? And his third argument is just sort of humanity, this basic tendency of people to sort of limit their anger, right? So Diodotus is the voice of reason, but Cleon says to the assembled crowd, which is in fact the same crowd, the same people who would be there watching the tragedies, right? He gets up there almost like a tragic performer, right? Cleon was known to use sort of exaggerated gestures and body language and raucous speech. And he says to the Athenians, you people are no good at governing. No democracy can undertake anything, he says, right? Because the opinions are all over the board, and there's no concerted action. And then he sort of goes back to what we heard about the Athenian character in Book One of Thucydides, when the Corinthians were describing the Athenians. Cleon says to them, you Athenians, you're in the theater. You think that all of life is basically who can outsmart whom. You listen to speeches and you try to figure out what the next thing is going to be said. You can't distinguish what the speaker is saying in terms of rhetoric from what the speaker is telling you in terms of facts. In other words, Cleon is saying to the Athenians, you come to the theater and you really don't know if you're watching a performance that's just meant to sort of be amusing or cathartic or whatever, or if you're there to listen and consider and debate and vote on an important issue of policy. So you have these two opinions, right? And it's very clear that as much as you want to sort of side with Diodotus because he's the humanitarian, there's something about Cleon that's very compelling. He knows his audience, right? He says to them, you people have to just sort of suck it up and act like a general would, right? You have to make hard decisions and stick to them. So what's the end of this whole Middle-Enean debate? Well, you have the Athenians voted, right, after listening to Cleon, they voted to put all of the male citizens of Mytilene to death. So they send out a ship with orders to do that, right? But then Diodotus gets up and he sort of tempers their anger, right? And they change their minds. Like, how do you change your mind? You just sort of condemn someone to death and condemned a whole, you sort of set a genocide into motion, right? You've condemned a whole city to death. And then based on what someone has said, you realize an hour later, you realize, oh, that was wrong, right? So they have to sort of figure out some way to undo the damage, right? So the orders that were sent with the ship, to Mytilene, saying, you're all going to be put to death, now have to be followed by another ship which gives the opposite orders, right? Which says, oh, we're only going to put to death the ringleaders, right? The people who began the conspiracy. And who's going to get there first? I mean, like if the first ship gets there first and reads the orders, they're going to start slaughtering citizens, right? So the story goes, and it's almost comic the way Thucydides describes it. The first ship is very slow because their duty is a sad one, and they don't want to do it, so they kind of take their time. The second ship, which has the orders of saying, no, 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 call off the slaughter, they've changed their minds. The second ship, which starts later by a matter of hours, right? They have they've been paid extra money by Mytileneans who happened to be in Athens at the time. They were given better food, better rations, and they were rowing harder, and they had more relief in rowing. So, like, they had extra guys on board to pick up the speed. So they made up almost the whole time of the difference between the two ships, except that the first ship with the orders of execution did get there first, and the generals started reading the order to the people, right? And then here comes running from the beach, right? Just like 15 minutes after them, the second ship, which says, no, 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 those orders have been rescinded. And the Athenians, of course, look ridiculous, right? And the Mytileneans are wondering what in the world is going on. Did he say something about we're all going to be slaughtered? And then the next guy comes in and says, no, that's not going to happen, right? The Athenians look as if they are like a schizophrenic sort of body politic. It's very different, right? This is one of the features of trauma, right? The madness of the ruler, right? You see that in Creon, right? He has, Creon and Antigone, who seems like the rational sort of ruler. For that matter, Oedipus does as well, until someone crosses him, right? Creon he seems like the conservative ruler. He's been sort of he's the ruler of Thebes by default because of what happened to the family of Oedipus. And he's just going to sort of be a steward, if you will, right? He's not going to make a lot of new policy, but he is absolutely sure that Eteocles and Polynices, the two brothers who were at war, one trying to protect the city, one trying to breach the wall. He's very sure that they're going to be treated very differently. And when he is sort of challenged, right, by his son, specifically, the idea of trying to be flexible, trying to be pliant, trying to respect the authority of religion as well as civic authority, he sort of becomes a much more aggressive, much more egotistical ruler. Oedipus before him, right? Same thing. At first, he comes on as the mild savior of Thebes. He saved Thebes from the Sphinx because he was the cleverest one, and things were going well. And then all of a sudden, there's a pollution that happens in the city. The crops don't grow. Women can't bear children anymore. And why is this happening? It's because the murder of the old King Laius is somewhere in the city. And Oedipus thinks, I can figure this out. I've saved the city before. I'm the one person, the superhero, if you will, in the situation who can take care of all these grave issues. And he's fine until people start to challenge him, and until people start to make it clear to him that possibly he himself is the murderer, right? But the war within the Oedipus Rex is largely within Oedipus himself, right? His whether or not he knows himself. The myth is a fantastic one, right? The myth goes, Laius and Jocasta try to have a baby, and are not successful. Laius then hears a prophecy that if there's a son born to him, that son will grow up to kill him. So in fear of this, he wants the infant exposed. So he takes the infant Oedipus and he gives him to a shepherd and says to the shepherd, do away with this child. The shepherd takes him up to one side of Mount Kithyron, which is the Theban side, right? And there's another shepherd there from the Corinthian side of Mount Kithyron, and they're friends. And the first shepherd is really sad. I have to put this beautiful baby, expose him on the hillside because that's the orders from the king. And the Corinthian shepherd says, "Well, wait a minute. My king, Polybus, and Merope, his queen, just had a child who was stillborn, and they don't have an heir to the throne. So let me just take this one back with me, and they'll raise this child as their own, right? It's a changeling situation. So as far as anyone knows, there's one dead child on the mountain and one live child, right? So Oedipus is raised in the court of Corinth. He thinks that he is the natural biological son of Polybus and Merope. And then he hears the same oracle that his father heard, that he is going to kill his father, right? So this oracle is sort of true, but he thinks he can understand it. He thinks that means he's going to kill King Polybus of Corinth. But no. He's going to kill his biological father, Laius. Well, when Oedipus hears the oracle, right, that he's going to kill his father and marry his mother, he thinks that the best thing to do is to put as many miles as possible between himself and his father and mother. So he leaves Corinth, and the route out of Corinth heads right back to Thebes. On the crossroads, the way where the three roads meet, right? Oedipus is confronted with a traveling party, which happens to be his biological father, King Laius. King Laius is going to Delphi. The 3 points of the road are Corinth, Thebes, and Delphi. Those are the 3 destinations, and there's a crossroads in the middle. So superstitious King Laius, who is having trouble with conceiving and making sure that his kingdom will be transmitted, is making another trip to consult Apollo at Delphi, and there apparently no traffic signs, right? And they confront each other, and words are exchanged, and it's a classic case of road rage. And Oedipus, being young and strong, kills not only the king but everyone in the party except one, right? It happens to be a shepherd. This guy runs away. So Oedipus thinks nothing of it. He's simply encountered, this ruffian, and he's done away with him. And he heads over to Thebes, and he finds Thebes in this terrible condition. There's a plague in the city. The Sphinx, this sort of horrible monster, is bringing all kinds of terror on the city, and she says to him, I will continue doing this until someone solves the riddle. What is the riddle? The riddle is, what is it that walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening, right? And of course, it's man, right? Man is a baby, right? Humans. Right? Man is a baby, crawls around on all 4s in the morning in infancy. And when humans grow up, they walk on 2 legs. And then when they become old and feeble, sometimes they have to rely on a stick, on a cane, and they walk, therefore, on 3 legs. He solves the riddle. The city is now sort of free of its plague. He's the conquering hero. We don't know what happened to the old king. He enters the city. Everyone loves him, and he marries the queen, right? Because apparently after a while, the old king doesn't come back, right? And he just sort of lives there as a hero, and then they sort of declare the old king dead, and he marries the queen. Lo and behold, the queen is his own mother. They conceive 2 children, right? Antigone and Ismene, 2 girls, right? And also 2 boys, Eteocles and Polynices. Very much an accursed family. So, when the curse sort of devolves, and when Oedipus finally discovers himself, something that he should have known, right? One of the great ironies of the Oedipus is that Oedipus, when he was a baby, and was going to be exposed. His ankles were tied together, and he bore a wound on his ankles. There's something about an irregularity in his gait. His name itself, Oedipus, means swollen foot. Something about his foot never recovered from that early injury. So the whole, walking on all fours and all threes is very poignant because it really reflects something deep in his life. Also, the irregularity of gait is something that is apparently inherited in Laius and Labdacus, because Labdacus was Oedipus's biological grandfather. His name indicates somehow being having a difficulty of walking or being deformed or lame because of the letter lambda has two legs that are of unequal length. And Laius means clumsy or left-handed, right? So there's this kind of physical irregularity which stamps the family. And it should have led Oedipus to sort of a more self-critical, right, attitude. But he holds out until the very end, until he finds the one shepherd who says, "Oh yes, I can tell you for a fact that when this murder happened, there was only one person who opposed all of us, and there was only one survivor." And it turns out Oedipus then knows that he is the murderer. He's the one who's brought pollution on the city. Of course, Jocasta cannot endure this, so she hangs herself, which is sort of, in Greek tragedy, is the method of suicide that female characters generally use. Oedipus blinds himself, right? Why does he not do away with himself? Interesting question. He can't, because he is fully convinced that if he does die, he's going to the underworld. He can't die, because if he dies, he will have to confront his father. He'll have to confront Laius, right? And so he can't bear the thought of being dead, nor can he bear the thought of being alive. So he has to inhabit this kind of middle ground, neither dead nor alive, right? It's a horrible situation. It's not a situation that's appropriate to a citizen. It's a monstrosity, right? The being that he is a monstrosity. However, in the Oedipus at Colonus, which is the last part of his story, right? Which was written in Sophocles' old age. There's a great story that's told about this when Sophocles was in his 90s. He was still working on this play, The Oedipus at Colonus, which had to do with the wanderings of the blind Oedipus going to Athens. And his sons were very tired of the old man wouldn't die, and they wanted their inheritance. And so they wanted to bring him into court and have him declared incompetent, because he's so old, and all he does all day is scribbles over his books. And so they brought him to court, and the 90-year-old Sophocles took out what he was working on, right, at the moment, which was the Oedipus at Colonus. He started reading some verses from it, and the court said, "The case is thrown out. This man is not only sane, he's a genius," right? The Oedipus at Colonus tells the story of how Oedipus has to be welcomed into another city, not Corinth, not Thebes, but Athens, and he becomes a hero in a sense. Now, in Greek thinking, the word hero does not mean Superman. It means someone who inhabits a situation that's not human and not divine, someone who is eternal, who lives eternally, but isn't necessarily omnipotent or very powerful. Kind of a spirit, right? Usually beginning as a human and ending up as a spirit. Cadmus in Thebes is a good example. Some historical figures, right? Like famous athletes. Cleomedes of Astypoli, a famous athlete who does a horrible thing. When people do horrible things, sometimes they are they're seen as sort of other than human. So Oedipus goes to Athens, and he is bound to sort of die there. Not really die there, but sort of vanish into the earth and become a hero and become worshipped there. And only Theseus, the king of Athens, is allowed to know where the site where this happens, right? So as horrible as the story is, as unspeakable as the story is, there is an element of rooting the story in the city because there is divine protection to be had, right? If there's value in returning to the recitation and the playing out of the story, even though it tells a tale of deeds that are so horrible, killing your father, marrying your mother, having children with your mother. They're so horrible, yet somehow we want to sort of package those stories in a safe capsule, right? And in Greek thinking, you do that with hero worship, with the cult of heroes. So that's part of the city. Part of the life of the city is that it contains these horrible truths that it has to live with, but it somehow needs to submerge at the same time, right? The tragedy, which begins in its more organized form in Athens, as I said, around 534 with Thespis under the tyrant Pisistratus, really ends with the end of the Peloponnesian War, with the downfall of Athens, because after that, and the death of Euripides, Euripides doesn't die in Athens. He actually leaves the city, right? He goes and spends his final years in Thrace. There are no more organized festivals. They simply have reruns, right? They have the word is escaping me now. Replays of the great tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. We haven't really touched on the Bacchae. The Bacchae, another interesting myth, can be seen as the myth of power, a power struggle within a family. You have Dionysus and you have Pentheus, and they're both descendants of Cadmus. They're both cousins and the same distance away from the original founder of the city. But Dionysus has left, right? And when he returns, Dionysus is a god. Pentheus represents the law and order of the city. Dionysus represents the powerful foreign cult, which people in the city respect, especially the women in the city respect, but it seems to be a threat to the established order. So how does the established order react to it? Right? It's the classic political, sort of the conservative shell that's built around the power structure, which utterly fails because Dionysus is an incredibly powerful god, and Pentheus is torn to shreds. Right? So the interesting thing about the Bacchae is, again, it's presented to an Athenian audience in the theater of Dionysus. And the question that's posed to them is, are you, Athens, going to circle the wagons and not allow sort of foreign notions and ideas to enter into the fabric of your culture? Or are you going to be syncretistic? Are you going to be accepting of new ways of worship, which have already kind of taken root in the body politic, right? And the answer that Euripides is going to give is resoundingly, you have to be flexible, right? That's the ultimate lesson in tragedies is the flexibility. Creon is inflexible, for that matter. Antigone herself is inflexible, right? But Creon's son Haemon says you're stronger if you're like a tree that waves in a storm, rather than like a stone which will either stand or utterly fall. It's better to be pliant. So thinking about tragedy, I mean, we don't have we're just sort of doing a sort of a flyover. But you can think of tragedy as a religious festival, which becomes this artistic structure, which is really coextensive with the life of Athens. And it's a mirror of Athens. It's sort of a metaphor. It serves as a metaphor for the life of the city, which allows the playwrights to come in to the same venue as political decisions are being made, in front of the same people who are making those decisions, and in an artistic and structured way can suggest and influence policy. So we're at 9:37. I think I've said a lot, and I think maybe it's time to wrap up. And so I will. Any questions, you can pop them into the chat, or we can say good night, and we'll see you again, whoever can make it, next week, right? I can't remember the date that I said, but it's on the blog there. I'm thinking we'll have a couple more of these. Okay. This will be downloaded to YouTube, right? And should be available by tomorrow morning. Okay. So I will say good night. Thank you for coming. Write me with questions. Send work, and we'll see you at our next class. Okay. Jingshin, I think I have, but I will recheck. Okay. And if I haven't, I will get back to you. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Okay. Thank you, Ved. See you next time, if you can make it. All right. All righty. I will put this up on YouTube ASAP. Thanks to all, and have a good night.